I'm Paul Dawson from the Bunya People's Aboriginal Corporation. Bunya People's Aboriginal Corporation, or BPAC, um, we're engaging community around for many years about how traditional custodians wanted to see the management of the mountain play out. One of the key things was about having the space for knowledge sharing, so where elders and young people could re-engage with country, re-engage with their communities, and share the stories of this really important place. So some of the issues we found with that were based on, the tenure. It's mainly, majority of the Bunya Mountains is national park, which is good for protections, but also has restrictions on how community can engage in a self-determined way, if you like, for and have control over how they wanted to meet and wanted to share story of place. So based on a lot of this feedback from community, we came the opportunity to invest in a space here in Russell Park, which is managed by the Western Downs Regional Council, to create a space for that sharing of knowledge and learning. So the concept evolved a lot from talks with many people, including Ben. Actually, I think the idea of a bush uni came from some of the interactions Ben had over in WA and what some of the Noongar were developing over there. And BPAC thought that it was really a great application to build a bush uni over here. And the concept of that being an on-country learning place, and the other, like as far as the development of the space goes, was to build in some of that interpretation and story in a creative way through these sculptural elements you'll find on the site. So the why the Bush Uni was in listening to community wanting a space to share and a space where we didn't have to go through big approvals process to be able to get community here to achieve those outcomes. And I think, there's the options for continuing that creative development of the space, but I think we've got amazing sculptures here now that help tell story but really immerse people into those sculptures as well, which is really important, rather than, I think it's an amazing place for people to be able to come and do self-guided tours, but it really lends itself to being here with people to tell story through the sculptures and through the art. So we've had a few events here since the development, so we can fit a good few hundred people in the space, and we've had local dance groups dancing and people sharing story with the men's and women's circles there. There's been, family groups coming to share their own family stories. We've had weaving workshops, we've had men's circles, as well as bigger launch events where, a lot of people can come and engage with the place. Our engagement with communities, it always comes up, the need for our young people to be hearing the stories from the elders and immersing back on country, especially with a huge range of pressures and issues young people face in, rural and urban environments in particular, in the towns and the cities. So we are partnering now with organisations that specialise in working with young people and connecting them not just with our rangers but with elders. So we're hoping to initiate a junior ranger program where the focus is not on formal ranger training and qualifications and certificates, but actually being present on country with elders in safe space where that reconnecting can happen in a proper way, and it's it's removed from a lot of the pressures that are barriers for young people to sort of grow and take leadership roles in how we can continue to look after country in a better way. So that's the aim. I can't say we haven't really got the runs on the board yet because we're just initiating these relationships to do it. But the bits and pieces we've done with some of the school groups and alternative Indigenous schools has been really positive. So it's about now structuring that into broader programs where there's some consistency in being able to be immersed on country with elders. So that's the goal.
My name is Jason Lawler. Proud lineage back to our old people, as blurry as that becomes into the past. But I definitely have a passion for the philosophy and the way our old people lived with the land and with all the life of the various spaces and countries we occupy. I had the great privilege of being involved in the Bunya People Aboriginal Corporation's Bush University. I know Brother Beaton was here on site with us early in the piece when this endangered grassland bald was being taken over by the acacia, which is how the forest takes back these grassland balds. So the vision of the Bonye peoples was to have a footprint back on the mountain, and so I've done a lot of stonework and representations previously on a much smaller scale, mind you, back towards town through the Gumunjuru Aboriginal Corporation, and this depiction of Dakin, the creator serpent, was directly correlates to the stone arrangements that are at Gumunjuru that were laid there 4,000 to 6,000 years ago by the old fellas. So it is a great privilege to be tasked with building such a place that not only brings back our cultural integrity to the space, but is here to heal the landscape as well. So it was no small task. There was many hands involved in getting this finished, and it still isn't finished. Hopefully it's never finished. There's that life that needs to keep coming in, and there's ceremonies being held. I know the general principle here is those three circles that were the men's circle, the women's circle, and the ceremony circle. The women being the keepers of the water, the men the keepers of the fire, and the great creator of the belly that all life came. So yeah, I did, what are we, 12, probably nearly 18 months after the opening and after the finish. It was a mammoth task. It was 18 months to build, and I absolutely love how the grasslands, she's sitting back in the landscape like she's always been here, which was a part of that great vision. There is a footprint, but it's a light footprint and memorable place to return. And of course, this was the place. This would sit right at the base of Mount Mulbalun here. There's lots of work to be done here. This was the grassland bald all the way to the top in the old times. But it is wonderful. It was a wonderful thing to save this small area and to have the old people coming back to this space that we gathered upon for millennia. Dakin, Dakan. the gathering place, the ceremony place.
My name's Shannon Bounds. I'm from Bunya People's Aboriginal Corporation, and we're in the Bunya Mountains right now. And in particular, we're in a little infrastructure footprint that's been designated for us to be able to share some of our culture and story with the wider community. What we're looking at here is the Gene Streams project, and what it does, it describes both Indigenous and Western scientific perspectives on deep time. So, well, it's essentially a time scale in this sculpture, and on the outside, as you can see, there's lots of different Indigenous arts and depicting flora and fauna that exists within this region and on the Bunya Mountains in particular. The inside is from the Western science perspective, and as you can see, it's color coded, which helps when you navigate the space. So this is the second installation that have been installed around the nation in strategic cultural landscape places that have been identified to be quite significant. Going back to the color coordination, this is symbolic. This is the brown, and it's symbolic of where mankind walks into the space. And if you look on the ground, it has the different time periods and where different flora and fauna came into this timeline. And there's a whole great deal of detail, and I've been in here dozens of times, and every single time I come in here I find something new. At the top of each panel, it has the land masses that existed within that particular time period. There's so much information here. It's a really great learning tool, and I think most visitors find it fascinating to spend time around this piece. Okay, so what we're looking at here, and I can talk on behalf of the artist. He's not here, and he's actually my son. This is depicting the Indigenous land use or land management practices that we employed for thousands of years. As you can see up the top, this is when the country's on fire, and then this is when it's been blacked out. So it's a series of different times, and you'll see some of the green pictures left for the wallaby tracks. The wallabies still will always leave a bit of green pick for them. We're not burning for 100% burn rate. We do leave little bits of habitat for animals to be able to exist and retreat to. This is when it's come back, and it always comes back bright green for all those people who've ever seen blacked out country. It always helps stimulate new growth, and it's a very interesting piece. There's actually bluegrass, which is endemic to the mountains itself, that's depicted in here as well. Yeah, I really like this piece. It's actually showing a very interesting relationship that occurs in not only rainforest but all forests, and it's something that science is just starting to really get a grasp of. It's depicting the mycelium, that it's a network that spreads throughout underneath the ground, and some people now refer to it as a World Wide Web, which is a bit of a tongue twister, but it's a very interesting relationship that they now learn that via this network that plants can detect threats that may come into the forest and send out a signal warning the rest of the forest. And it also has shown that trees have the ability to identify their young and their grandchildren, etc., and if need be, able to send nutrients via this network. It's a very interesting piece, I think. This one here is from another artist who's done the Bunya sun skink, which was largely unknown to science until the late 90s, early 2000s. The Bunya sun skink only occurs on the grass, the high altitude grasslands which occur on the Bunyas. This one is depicting what's commonly known as the lacebark tree, which is a beautiful tree that exists within these rainforests. Actually has really big purple flowers which fall and are a great contrast to the green of the rainforest. It's actually spectacular. It's brachiochiton, which is related to the Queensland bottle tree, and these seeds can actually be eaten. They're edible and have a flavor of like a coffee popcorn flavour. Yeah, very nice tree. It's actually a brachiochiton discolor, not to be confused with that colour. This is a piece depicting the black-breasted button quail, which is hard to say very fast 10 times. The black-breasted button quail is actually a threatened species, and they're very elusive. They're very hard to spot live, but you can, as you see here, you can find these little disc platelets, they're called, that they leave behind from their scratchings in the dirt. So you might not see the quail itself, but you might find these, which then let you know that they're present in that particular area.
Hi, I'm Steve Parrish, and I'm a nature photographer with 56 years, photographing everything from fish to rainforest to deserts to lizards, from the air, underwater, and my driving ambition has always been to connect people to nature. That's the driving force that drives me to get out of bed every morning. It's my passion. But I've never ever had an opportunity to be involved in a physical experience that people can walk through the forest and connect with right here in their heart in a physical way. My work has always been in books, and now it's social media, so they're pictures in books that people buy and connect that way. So this is very, very, very unique. It's globally unique, in fact. This beautiful gene stream sculpture, a physical object that people can walk into and physically touch and see in the natural environment. And here are some of my images. You can see the beautiful wedge-tail eagle, which is very synonymous with the Bunya Mountains. You see them soaring over the plains. In fact, we've seen them nesting over many years in and around the Bunya Mountains. So that's a wonderful addition. You can see this beautifully blended into this artwork. This is gorgeous artwork. And also, we have over here the echidna, which is also not endemic, but very synonymous with this particular area. And you'll find them particularly in the open woodland and also in the rainforest. Yeah, so people are now going to be able to go back in time and look at the geology and the connection with indigenous culture over millennia. So it's a great honour to be involved in this project.
I'm Marley Moyer. I'm a botanical, scientific and natural history artist, and I love detail. We've chosen 15 species in this artwork which speak to the ecosystem here in the Bunya Mountains. Some are endangered and some are well known. In seeing the bigger picture of the ecosystem, that is what the sculpture is representing. It's made up of smaller parts, and remembering that it's the details that differentiate species from each other. So it's the details that I'm interested in as a scientific illustrator. This is a painting that I painted of a part of a bunya nut. This is the bunya nut down here in a drawing. This is an ovuliferous scale, which is female. This is a sketch of the cone. So you can see these points here. That's that point there. So that green part there is really just a sliver of that particular scale, because it's the green, the outer green part of the cone. The cones are huge. I mean, they're like that. They're like a football. They're very heavy. They can weigh up to 5 kilograms, and they're very dense. And these scales are all packed in really tightly into that ball. So you can imagine how heavy that is when it falls out of the tree. You don't want to be standing underneath bunya pines when they're dropping their cones. Inside this scale, because the whole cone is female, inside the scale is the kernel. So you can see it's almost like a rounded shape. That's the part that you eat, where you can roast them, you can boil them, and I think you can even eat them raw. I was fascinated with these, that vibrant, vivid green. It's just a sliver you see on the outside of the cone, and then this is the internal side. It was rich golden reds, but it shimmered with different colours like shot silk. It was very tricky to paint, and I loved every minute of it. These are the leaves of the bunya pine, and you can see the seasonal growth in there. So with the smaller leaves here, that indicates that it was growing through the winter season, And these bigger, more lush leaves come out. That's the strong growing season through the spring and summer. Come in a little bit closer because I'll show you the cladogram of the Bunya pine. Here is a cladogram that talks about the araucarias, and you can see there's a little picture of each of the different species in that genus. It shows the different shapes of the scales and how that is part of the identifying feature of the different species of the araucaria. Over here is the classification for araucaria, and it's a great big long list, but it is in the Araucariaceae family. Aceae, after plant names, refers to the family. So when you see Aceae, you think, oh, it's a plant family. Underneath that is the genus. The genus is Araucaria, and this particular species is called Bidwillii. The botanical name is Araucaria bidwillii, and that's named after the botanist John Bidwill. The common name of Araucaria bidwillii is the bunya pine, or I grew up knowing it as bunya pine. And remember, it's not a pine. It is a conifer. It's a huge tree. You can see one up there with its classic dome shape, but it's not a pine. So that's a common name. A pine is from the Pinus genus, and this is from the Araucaria genus, so they're quite different. You can see it is a huge forest tree. There's a detail here of the global distribution of this genus, Araucaria, and Bidwillii is here, of course, in Australia. It doesn't grow anywhere else. It is endemic to Australia. And here we have a relative as well, Agathis robusta. So there's Araucarias that grow all around the globe. They evolved alongside the sauropods, and we haven't forgotten that in this artwork. And one of the nicknames for the bunya pine is a dinosaur egg. The bunya pine is endemic to Australia, but it is a close relative of the monkey puzzle tree found in South America.
Hi, my name's Ben Beaton. We're in the Bunya Mountains at the Gene Stream Sculpture. For years I'd created art on the ecology, geology and deep time history of natural systems, and I'd also been working on the Gene Streams project. The two were running in tandem, and I never believed that there would come a point where I'd be able to bring all of this together. That was until Arnie Carroll Peterson asked me a question: was there some way that we could bring together the conservation work in an area with work that was being done on the scientific communities and research in the area, as well as the culture of the area. So for years I worked through that problem, how to bring a public artwork together that would address all of those different components in the one sculpture. And it was at that time that I realized that if I created an evolutionary tree of the area, where I addressed all of the deep time story of the shared ancestry of species on the base plate of the sculpture, and told the story of the science of the region on the inside of the sculpture, and the culture of the region on the outside of the sculpture, it would be a way of bringing that question together, all of those components. So in this sculpture, we see an example of how we bring together the gene streams of species with the ecology, geology and deep time history of species on the inside of this sculpture that you walk into. A gene streams represents the sum total of the gene pool of a range of species. Gene streams travel across the globe through deep time over hundreds of millions of years, changing into a myriad of species, from ancestral species to descendant species and so on through deep time. That's why I chose the word gene streams to describe this form of public art and this form of science communication. So let's pretend that I'm somebody that's approaching the Gene Streams sculpture for the first time, and I'm curious. I don't know what this is all about. Clearly there's a walkway into it and there's an invitation. So I'm going to walk into it Now, bearing that in mind, this all looks pretty unusual. I'm going to tell you what this actually means. I am representing the whole of humanity as I enter this sculpture. Anyone that enters the sculpture represents the whole of humanity. And each one of these panels represents a different species. It's color-coded to show that the animals are in orange and the plants are in green. So, being an animal, I can see that this continues on. And what does that mean? This is a phylogenetic tree for the base plate, so it's a detail of the tree of life, and it's going to show me where I share common ancestry with these other species. So if I walk back in time, I can see if I turn around, so I can actually read these unusual words. These are the periods of geological time. This is the Jurassic period from 201 to 145 million years ago, and if I follow that back around here, you can see just here it's joined to this line, and this is the quoll. Here we can see fantastic scientific illustration by Marley Moyer of the spotted quoll, and a wonderful photograph by Steve Parrish. So this is telling me that at this point in deep time I share a common ancestry with the quoll. But you see, then they go back together. The ancestor of both myself and the quoll go back to, it says Triassic. That's 251 to 201 million years ago. So this is the first period of time when dinosaurs lived. And if I follow that back around to this point, you can see this is where myself and the quoll, the common ancestor of those two, share a common ancestor with this next species, and that is the echidna. Here you can see the illustration that myself and Marley Moyer did of the echidna, and we can see a wonderful photograph of the echidna by Steve Parrish. So the common ancestor of all three of these now goes back to this period of time here. And let's go and check what it is. It's the Carboniferous period. So that is 358 to 298 million years ago. And that's at a time that we find fossils of dragonflies the size of eagles, spiders the size of your head. And at that point, we're sharing a common ancestor with the carpet python. An illustration that Marley Moyer and myself did together, and so on. And that is how we plot back through time this story of the shared ancestry of a whole range of species, until we get right back to this point here, where we can see beyond the Ediacaran, somewhere deep, deep within the Precambrian, the plants and the animals share a common ancestor. And at that point, we call this, going back even further than that, all the way back to the origin of life on Earth, Luca, the last universal common ancestor. And all of these species are found in the Bunya Mountains. Species that we've selected, very special species found in the Bunya Mountains, many of whom we often focus on threatened and endangered species. So when I leave the sculpture, I'm leaving with this incredible awareness of the shared ancestry of myself with all of those other very special species that we share this planet with in this incredible environment that we call the Bunya Mountains. I'm going to show you how to use this sculpture. Now, looking at the base plate, we find the Cambrian period, for example. It says Cambrian, and then next to it, it says the date. It says, in this case, it runs from 538.8 million years ago to 485 million years ago. And then what I do is I look up onto these panels and I look for the Cambrian map. It says Cambrian at the top. Cambrian at 540 million years ago. And that's telling me what the world looked like in the Cambrian period. And then I might go down again and I might look, say, at the Silurian period. And it tells me the Silurian period, which is later on, is 443 million to 419 million years ago. Then I look up again, I look around, there's the Silurian period. And I can see Australia at the time is on the equator or thereabouts. Silurian period, 438 million years ago. So that is how we use this connection between the base plate, which is, for all intensive purposes, a phylogenetic map, with the artworks that I've created in collaboration with scientific illustrator Marley Moyer and a range of other artists. On my travels in Western Australia, when I was in the town of Albany, I met an artist called Jenny Wilson who introduced me to the process of eco-dyeing. And you can see that the sculpture is covered in the process of eco-dyeing. It's literally everywhere throughout the sculpture. The reason that I wanted to use eco-dyeing, and I want to use eco-dyeing in all of the sculptures, is because it reminded me of fossils of the past. And to me, it was an insight into what the fossils of our time would be. That's the fossils of the future. So amongst the many things that this sculpture celebrates, it's celebrating the fossilization of our time into the future. A lot of people, when they come into this sculpture, look at the word Luca and they don't know what it means. It means last universal common ancestor, deep within the Precambrian. Each one of these brackets of time is measured in millions of years. So that small yellow section is the Luca, that shared ancestor that all plants, animals, fungi have together. And then you can see a phylogenetic tree breaking apart in different directions. The orange color represents the animals and the green color represents the plants. And so we move through that into the Ediacaran. The whole Luca period jumps not just millions, it jumps billions of years. But the Ediacaran, Cambrian, Ordovician, and so on, to give you a brief understanding of that, the Cambrian is when we see the evolution of eyes and the radiation of many forms of life. The Ordovician, it's now believed that perhaps Ordovician is when the first plants come onto land. Australia at the time had a seaway in it and the rise of the McDonald Ranges. Silurian is really where we see the plants coming onto land, and Devonian is where we see our ancestors coming onto land. And the first forests, Devonian, is where you get massive funguses as well. And then we have the Carboniferous period, and that's where giant forests are, and there's dragonflies the size of your head, there's millipedes the size of cows. Extraordinary time. And the Permian brings an end to that. The Permian, at the end of the Permian, we have the massive extinction event. There's been many mass extinctions, but the Permian was the biggest, and that's where we have something like 95% of all life disappearing on the planet due to massive volcanism in the Siberian traps that lasted millions of years. And from the Permian, we move into the Triassic, and this is the beginning of the dinosaur time. So everything from the Cambrian to the Permian is Paleozoic. Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous is known as the Mesozoic, and that's all the time of the dinosaurs. So Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, the end of the Cretaceous, the asteroid hits the Earth, and then we move into the Paleogene, the Neogene, and the Quaternary. And that is a very, very brief story of the deep time history of shared ancestry of the planet. The shared ancestry of all of these species that the sculpture represents is found within those periods of geological time. And right on the outside, that entrance point, that's where the humans exist. So when you walk into the sculpture, you represent the whole of humanity. Throughout this entire sculpture, you'll find many little details. For example, here we can see Australia breaking away from Antarctica and the formation of the Southern Ocean. Australia was the last of the continents of Gondwana to break away from Antarctica, and I just find that to be an incredible story. Everywhere you look in this sculpture, there's small little details that will tell you more about the deep time history of Australia and the formation of landscapes and the evolution of species. The story of the Bunya Mountains is the story of volcanism,
And so throughout this artwork, I've told the story of the formation of the East Coast, and a strong part of that story is the story of the movement of Australia as it drifted north over a hotspot. It's believed actually there were several hotspots, and as it drifted north intermittently, this hotspot erupted and you had another volcanic episode. So there are volcanoes much further north from the Bunya Mountains and much further south, including all the way down to Hanging Rock. If you know the movie Picnic at Hanging Rock, it's all part of the same story. It's all interconnected. So throughout this sculpture, you'll find lots of small details that tell the story of those incredible connections of the geological and volcanic history of the east coast of Australia. I love featuring sequences in the artwork that tell the story of deep time over millions of years in a sequence of images. So you can see the hotspot that formed the volcanism, and as Australia moves north, it creates more volcanoes. And so it's now down here, and that's the idea that in the future, the very same hotspot that is responsible for a lot of the East Coast volcanism, all the way up to here, will one day form a volcano in the northwest, potentially of Tasmania. This is another way of thinking about a phylogenetic tree. So in this one, time is going in this direction, and wherever you see it breaking into two, that's where we see a common ancestor breaking into two different descendant groups, and the names of them at the end. So phylogenetic trees to me are absolutely wondrous, and I've spent many years drawing them and fascinated by them, which is the foundation for the Gene Streams project. As the base plate is a phylogenetic tree exhibited in the round, so too we can see another example of a phylogenetic tree exhibited in the round. And interestingly, above it, I spoke about the deep time history. It takes a long time for this level of speciation to occur. You could see we start with, say, one species, say here, that breaks into two different groups and so on, and this is the result at the end of a huge amount of evolution. What does that tell us about the deep time history of the planet? It tells us that the planet's moved around a lot. In this particular case up here, this small little detail that most people maybe won't see, this is actually the ice sheet during the Carboniferous period, when dragonflies were the size of eagles and spiders were the size of your head. This panel represents the quoll. In it you can see some of scientific illustrator Marley Moyer's wonderful illustrations of it. We also have a detail from Steve Parrish. But what you'll see over here is that Marley Moyer and I have done the research as often as we possibly can to show through the Linnaean system of classification where the quoll exists within the tree of life. And so the Linnaean system of classification is really a way of locating any species within the tree of life, and we also show its status. That's its conservation status, and in this case it's invulnerable. So very important to protect this species. I remember a story by Gary Muir, who's one of our team members who did the research on the base plate to locate the shared ancestry of the species. He set up a camera, and because he was looking for the quoll, he'd found footprints. He found a quoll running along it, but just behind it there was a feral cat, and I believe all they found left after that was the head of the quoll. So very important to protect these species.
This is the area we've flagged for a meeting place and potentially a learning place. We're at the base of Maboolan, which is an iconic peak in the Bonye Mountains. I think it translates to bald head, so it was known to always be clear grassland. So we're in a little sheltered area. I guess as you can see, we've got a pretty significant acacia infestation here, which was a pretty clear grassland. So yeah, I guess we're here to talk about and get inspiration for what we can, I guess, construct or create here to make this space a place where people connect and understand the Bunyas.
So the ingredients, if we talk about the ingredients, the things that you want to see like feeding into whatever the outcome of it is, what we were discussing before was obviously the perspectives of the traditional owners, the plants, animals that we might potentially utilize or living, with and traveling through time, like with, how do we connect those narratives with the narratives of the rock, the age of the rock, and what science is now telling us about the genetic connections, the deep time connections between this. So all of these species, as we know, we all share a common ancestor. And how do we tell all of those stories? And also recognizing that this is part of a larger kind of song line as well, and interconnecting this up in itself as a kind of element, but it's also joining the dots. Like potentially this is one as a number of a sequence.
Yeah, I think if we can capture even the essence of that and half of those stories would be an amazing thing. But I think it is so dynamic and complex in a way. But I think, one of the key things I'd like to see is that we are part of that human connection as part of, I guess, the development of this landscape in this country. But I do agree, I think, for me, this is definitely a central node, a heart of a big landscape. Would like to demonstrate how it is connected throughout a larger area. I think that's interesting how, that
you see those
song lines maybe match some of the...
I saw the map where you had a number of song lines,
and there was change.
There was these cluster points, and so what you're saying is this is one of those
I believe it is.
Those overlaying points where a number of song lines meet.
Yep.
Right.
I believe it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And then there's so this is a multifaceted kind of sculptural work. It's a sculptural work, but it's also the scaffolding and a repository for it's a meeting place, but it's also a teaching place. That's my understanding.
Yeah.
I think Jason used the word learningscape.
Yeah, learnscape.
Learnscape?
Yeah. It's I like that term.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
And I think, through a creative means, which is sort of up for interpretation, it has an interpretation and there's the science and the knowledge behind it. But, people can see the work and get different senses of what it means to them, I think is really cool. So if we can achieve that all with one project, it'd be amazing.
I think that we can. I think that with the stuff I was doing, I went for super complexity into simplicity that still held its own with, to use, as Jason was saying, the materials that are in the landscape. And if we're also going to introduce to that, like ecological connections.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the scale has to honour that. We've got song and dance men in our ranger team there. So I'm sure they're thinking about where they can dance up country, sing up country here. So there needs to be space for that. But I think for the yarn, I'd like to see a space that 20, 30 people can immerse in and sit around. So I think, if that gives a picture of that sculptural scale, that's what's in my mind of what we should be aiming or could aim for. It's one of the best places in the world for looking at the stars here. Yeah. So I guess that nighttime tourism, if you like, or educational activities.
If you do the lighting
really
thing,
well,
open it up and then you press the button, it's all dark.
That's right. People come up, see the stars, but here's a story as well, and you can use the lights to tell it. That would be incredible for sure. How you connected now.
There's so much you can do here. This is an amazing site. This is going to be awesome. How long do you think this is going to take?
Well, there's a few dependencies, but I think for me, I can't tell until we've got the concept, the agreed concept, and got the momentum for let's do it. Once we got the momentum for let's do it, it'll happen.